Good evening, everyone. It's very nice to have all of you here present online in, I think, our third English conferences here on our Facebook page. If you're new to our conferences, please comment, let us your questions, your ideas in the chat below our video presentations. And of course, for all of you, our entire conference will be posted 1 hour after it ends on our YouTube channel, so you can find it easier there to share or even to watch again and even to write us again other questions in the following days or months. I'll keep it shortly. Thank you for being together with us, and I'll pass the microphone to my colleague Mihai Enescu to tell us what we're going to hear tonight.
Hello, Marine. Hello, friends. I'm very happy because tonight we have a very interesting topic that we, Romania, used to have some 10 years ago. Not too common, unfortunately, these days. But hopefully, due to this presentation and due to our joint plans, let's hope that agroforestry system will be more famous in Romania in the coming years. So, as I told you, I'm very happy because tonight we have a special guest for European Agroforestry Federation, EURAF, shortly EURAF, Gerry Lawson, who is a policy analyst within EURAF, and also my old good friend, Constantin Muraru, a Romanian who's working now at EURAF based in Brussels, who will intervene perhaps by the end of his presentation. So, Gerry, thank you very much for accepting this presentation, and the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Mihai, and thank you, Marine, and I'm glad to be here. I hope you can hear me okay. Just interrupt if the hearing is bad. So I've got quite a lot of slides. I may move fairly quickly because I don't want to bore you too much, but I'm going to talk from the point of view of agroforestry policy mainly. With a little bit about environmental impact, because I think a number of things are changing quite dramatically, particularly in terms of carbon sequestration and in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, that I think will make agroforestry important in Romania and in most other European countries, more important than it seems to be in many agricultural departments throughout Europe at the moment. So let's get started. You see in this slide, you see Iberian pigs grazing underneath evergreen oak. And this is in the east of Spain and also in the south of Portugal. It's a very common sight. So there are about 8 million hectares of this type of mixed agroforestry system in Europe. So if anyone plans to take a holiday, I thoroughly recommend going to Portugal or to the east of Spain for this. So the next slide, I'm going to be talking about the types of agroforestry, the data we have about trees outside the forest, the European Green Deal, which I'm sure everybody knows about, how we can measure the CAP, the Common Agricultural Policy targets, biodiversity targets, climate targets, and then other indicators of environmental impact and biodiversity. So they're just a plug for the European Agroforestry Federation. You can see our new website at the bottom, and everyone's very welcome to go to that. So types of agroforestry, there are many, many definitions, and the first message is don't worry, keep calm, it doesn't matter. There have been big arguments about what the definition should be, but as I'll show later, it's actually quite difficult to put an upper limit on the number of trees and a lower limit on the number of trees. So we're tending to suggest that any trees on agricultural land should be considered as agroforestry. So I'll leave those definitions there for a while. There are some words like woody perennials, which are difficult for a farmer to understand and not very useful in the definition. There are other definitions like the second one, which sound very nice, but actually are impossible to measure. These are nice things that agroforestry does, but how do you quantify that? And then there's the US Department of Agriculture definition, including the growing of trees and shrubs. So there's some discussions about whether shrubs should be included, shrubs on their own. And you see, well, we'll see in a minute, that may cause problems. But this is the simple definition used in the last rural development regulation. So they're land use systems in which trees can be grown in combination with agriculture on the same land. And actually that definition does include the use of animals within forest land as well. So it can be either agricultural land with trees or forest land with animals. So that definition is quite flexible. But it does raise some difficulties. For example, this is Calluna vulgaris, a dwarf shrub which covers huge areas in Scotland but never grows above that sort of height. Should that be included as agroforestry? It's not a tree. So I would say if it doesn't get to the height of a tree, it's not really agroforestry. The same with these dwarf birch in Lapland in the north of Sweden. Maybe that is agroforestry, maybe not. One tree in an agricultural field, I don't know whether that's agroforestry or not. Similarly, this is saltbrush in Spain. It doesn't get very high. So the point is that it's for the member states of the European Union themselves to make their own definition. And if you click on this presentation, you'll find each country has their own definition. So I should, Constantine, I'm sorry, I should have included the Romanian definition. Forgive me for doing that. Maybe we can look at that in the discussion at the end. So remind me, it might be worth doing that. So next slide. But the classification that we have within Europe makes a distinction between forest land and agricultural land. And we can see, for example, that a silvopastoral system on forest land could be called forest grazing, whereas on agricultural land, it could be called wood pasture. Okay. We have translated all of these definitions. Again, Constantine, I should have shown the Romanian version of this. Again, we can have a look at that at the end. So there's not a good definition of agroforestry in each country, but there is a good definition of forest land. So in Romania, for example, the minimum area, the minimum block for an area of forest is 1/4 of a hectare. It's 0.25 hectares. So anything smaller than that is not forestry. Therefore, it's probably agroforestry if it's on agricultural land. Similarly, in Romania, the width of a forest block is 20 meters. If it's 15 meters, it's not forestry, it's agroforestry. So these are useful definitions, and we have these definitions for every single country in Europe. So it will be quite interesting to compare the forestry law and see whether at all times these thresholds are used in Romania. So that's the definition of forest. The member states have been very bad actually at measuring the number of trees and the crown area of trees outside the forest. So you can see all the member states in Europe here. And you can see the forest land, they're very good at measuring forest land. There's this other thing called other wooded land, which is land which has not sufficient percentage of tree cover to be called a forest. And then there's another thing which is called other land with tree cover. So if we look, for example, at Greece, we've got almost 50% of the area of trees is outside forest. Whereas if we look at Poland, they say they have no trees, 0 trees outside the forest, which is very unlikely, but that's what they say in the statistics. Romania has none of this other land with tree cover, which I'm surprised about, and a fairly small amount of other woody land. So only 0.2% of the trees in Romania are outside the forest. So I think we can agree that there's something strange about these statistics, because there are many trees on agricultural land which are not included in these statistics sent to the FAO. So the first thing is to have a look at how we can improve that. And there are many, many ways now with satellites to measure trees and to count trees outside of forests. And if they can do it in the Sahara, we can surely do it in Europe. So this is using a method to calculate 1.8 billion individual trees in this area of the Sahara using satellite photographs. So that's a question of how we measure the trees. If we are talking about new planting, where should that new planting be? This map is one which we produced 2 years ago as an input to the European forestry strategy, because the forestry strategy and the European biodiversity strategy have a commitment to planting 3 billion additional trees in Europe. And the Department for the Environment in Europe asked us where we thought these additional 3 billion trees should go. And this is a map showing agricultural land, only agricultural land in Europe. And superimposed on that is a product from the Copernicus system, which shows the percentage tree crown cover. So if you look at the red marks, that shows agricultural land which has zero, absolute zero over a 1 hectare area, no trees at all. And then 1.5 and 6 to 10. So our argument was that those areas which have greatest landscape need of trees, they suffer greatest erosion from wind erosion, from water erosion, where trees should be planted are the tree deserts. And that's where we should be focusing the tree planting. And what we want to do is use this map as a long-term target for Europe. So we can say to Europe, okay, each year or each 2 years, when you do produce this map again, how much red is decreasing and how much green is taking over? How many trees are we planting outside the forest throughout Europe, with a target of reaching 10% tree cover throughout Europe by 2030, which is the next big climate change target date. Okay, so that's where we should be planting trees. Let's look at the Green Deal, which we all know about. So the Green Deal has many different components: farm to fork, circular economy, emissions trading scheme, forest strategy, adaptation to climate change. All of those are important. The one which is happening just as we speak is that each country, including Romania, is producing its own national climate and energy NECP policy. Policy statements. Now this, I would be very interested in the discussion whether anyone knows whether there has been a discussion in Romania about these policies, because the important thing is that the policy has to show how Romania will meet the new targets that it has been given for greenhouse gas sequestration. And there should have been a big public debate about that, and everything should be ideally published in June, but I don't know whether anybody here has heard anything about that. It would be very interesting. So that's one Green Deal target. The next slide relates to, again, the greenhouse gas emissions reporting systems that all countries do. And all countries have 6 categories of land. They have cropland, they have grassland, they have wetland, they have forest land, and they have settlements. And they are supposed that most of them focus a lot on calculating the effect of trees on greenhouse gas sequestration on forest land, but many of them don't do anything at all for cropland or for pasture land. They ignore the trees in these areas at a national level. So the other thing that we're trying to do is campaign for better measurement and monitoring of those statistics. And also each country, the Commission has tried to encourage each country to use better and better models for calculating greenhouse gas emissions and better identification of land parcels so that we know whether it's cropland or grassland or forest. And again, Romania and all countries are being urged to move towards this tier 3 approach 3 with full geo-tracking of parcels. Also, what is happening, and it's quite exciting, is that countries are being asked not just to measure this thing called LULUCF, which is land use change and forestry, but they're also asked to integrate that with the measurements of nitrous oxide and methane emissions from agricultural land. So from 2025 onwards, we will have integrated reporting across the whole of the land use pillar. So integrating agriculture, forestry, and agroforestry in between, which is one thing that EURAF has been arguing for a long time. Okay, so moving on for a minute from climate to look at CAP monitoring. Everybody will know that there are area payments made to farmers under something called Pillar 1, but a farmer does not get those area payments free for nothing. The farmer must maintain his or her land in good agricultural and environmental condition. And this, in the new CAP, there are things called eco schemes, which are short-term schemes, low financing, but farmers must do that to get a portion of their money released, and those are environmental focus schemes. Together with that, there are rural development programs in what's called Pillar 2, and Pillar 2 can fund forestry. So the forestry schemes in Romania will be funded through Pillar 2 there. So we would like to see forest grazing being supported in Pillar 2. But the important thing is at the top right now in the current CAP, Article 4 of the new CAP clearly says that agricultural area shall include agroforestry systems. So there's no doubt, there should be no doubt in anybody's mind that agroforestry is eligible for basic payments. There has been doubt in past years. So I talked about the elements of conditionality, the thing that every farmer has to do. There are now 9 of these. But agroforestry contributes to all of those, like maintaining permanent grassland or protecting wetlands or improving the filtration of nitrate, managing tillage. All of those we think that agroforestry can make a contribution to. The 10 good agricultural and environmental conditions. And one of those agricultural environmental conditions is the new Gaia Gate, which is very important for trees outside the forest because it includes hedgerows or lines of trees. It includes trees in groups and isolated trees, and also forest edges. So there are a number of other landscape features like buffer strips, piles of stones, ponds and terraces, but these are the main ones that EURAF is interested in. And I think the next slide, the next slide is here. It's quite detailed, so you can stop the presentation and look at it in detail later. But I was talking about the woody forest strips, which are these ones, hedges or woody strips, trees in line, trees in groups, as long as they're not a forest, so they're less than the threshold size. So in Romania, if we look at that one, Romania over here, yep. So we see, interesting, you've got a problem here. So the minimum threshold size is 1/4 of a hectare. But according to the strategic plan, it can be agriculture if it's as big as 0.9 of a hectare. So that tends to suggest that the forestry department has not been talking to the agricultural department when the Romanian strategic plan was written. So that may be something you want to check at a local and national level, but you're not unusual in that. The same has happened in all the countries that have got red red numbers there. There's a difference between the minimum threshold of forest and the maximum threshold of a small area of woodland that is still agriculture. But anyway, if we look at Romania, we'll see Romania on the next slide, but you see a lot of countries now are implementing hedges, woody strips, trees in line, trees in groups as landscape features, which count towards the 10% of agricultural land that should be maintained in high biodiversity landscape features, and also count towards the requirement for GAIA 8, which is slightly different. So these are Romanian figures taken from your strategic plan. If you click on the link, you'll get a link to the plan in Romanian. So you see that that hedgerows, trees in line, and these are the conversion factors. So if you have an individual tree, for example, that individual tree is assumed to occupy 20 meters squared, whereas a line of trees is supposed to occupy 5 meters squared. Well, you take the length of the line and multiply it by 5. Okay, so I won't go into detail there, but there are issues. So the maximum width of a hedgerow is allowed is 30 meters, minimum maximum width of tree line is also 30 meters. But we've got this 0.1 hectare threshold, which is surprising. So in many other countries, you have very detailed, they're called land parcel identification systems to identify each parcel of land and each sub parcel of land. And in Spain, for example, those have been used to determine the percentage eligibility of the farmer for basic payment. So the farmer of this field with a lot of trees, it's been calculated that he'll get 84% of the entitlement of this farmer here with fewer trees. So different countries have employed different systems, but the sophistication of the system is quite large. And this system exists in Romania. I would encourage you to have a look at it. I don't know if it's open for public downloading of the data, but it should contain the information about lines of trees, groups of trees, individual trees. So I would be very pleased if anyone can tell me whether this APIA system has a public portal, a public site where you can interrogate it like in other countries. So that's another question to accumulate for the discussion. Oh, I just did this before, right? So this one is looking at the emissions of Romania in 1990, and you can say there were 229 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, which fortunately has gone down by 60%, so it's now 92%. But I'm showing this slide to show the importance of agriculture, which is the gray box, and LULUCF, which is mainly forestry, were not such a big proportion in 1990, but they are a bigger proportion now. So putting 24%, 21% of the total emissions now come from agriculture. And that trend is going to continue. The emissions from other sectors of the economy will get smaller, but it's very difficult to reduce the emissions from agriculture. So in 2050, there will still be agricultural emissions that have to be balanced against the sequestration from trees. But either way, the carbon balance is going to be very important. Okay, guys, these are the new targets just agreed. What's today's date? 9th, okay. So in 2 days' time, the LULUCF, the land use change regulation will become law. So on the 11th of May. And these are the new targets which every country has to face. So Romania currently has a, it has a target of, that has to be this one. Okay, so these were the LULUCF, this was the LULUCF sequestration in these years, 2016 to 2018. And the target now has been increased from what it was then. It's been increased by 2.4 million tons carbon dioxide equivalent to this. So Romania, as well as all these other countries, have been given an increased sequestration target, and they now have to produce a plan that says how they're going to do it. How many new forests will you plant? how big an area of agroforestry will you have, how much carbon is going to be sequestered, how can Romania possibly reach this new target in 2030, which is quite demanding. Okay. So every country is still facing the same. So what this slide is saying, that there's good data available for hedgerows, groups of trees, isolated trees. Romania should be using that to plan the new planting programs for its trees. And there are increasingly detailed satellite imageries available that for example, go down to very small 40 centimeters, 30 centimeter pixel resolution. Each dot on the picture is 20 centimeters. So you can see individual trees, and individual farmers get this information. They can therefore plan where on their farm, which corners, which hedges, which areas they can plant trees without too much affecting the existing production that they have, or which areas could they plant with widely spaced trees and put animals under the trees, or how many new rows of silvoarable systems could they have.
Gerry, this is based on Copernicus. These images are.
No, this isn't. This trying to go back. Yeah, that one. So that one is, these are ortho photographs. Okay, sorry. The lesson is not to go back. Okay.
I was curious to know.
Sorry, I wanted to go back to the old slide. I've now screwed it up. But it's not. I'll just wait for it to load. It's based on ortho photographs which are made available to all farmers. Those ortho photographs have traditionally been flown in aircraft, so they're higher resolution than Copernicus. When I load this one and eventually move to the right slide. Okay. You can cut this out of the YouTube if you're able to do that, yeah, because we've got quite a.
We are able to do whatever we want. So.
Okay. So I guess I would be better going. I'm almost there now. Okay. Right. So these pictures are based on, as I said. So these traditionally they based it on airborne imagery, but now the satellite imagery is almost getting good enough to use that, but at the moment it isn't. So you're getting high resolution. This is not Copernicus. These are private satellites. You have to pay for this data. Copernicus is the NIST one, and we are using Copernicus. So the map that I showed you before, the red-green map with data at 100 meters, is this small woody feature one here. So that's the one that we're using. We could have used the 5-meter resolution, but it's so big it's difficult to analyze. We just chose the coarse one for that. So Copernicus is fantastic. The data becoming available from Copernicus is very impressive. This is one quick slide to talk about something called Inspire. It would be quite useful to look at the Inspire portal for Romania as well. So Inspire is a directive that has been around for a long time, since 2007, I think. And it obliges member states to provide a portal for geospatial data. Any geospatial data collected with public funds, member states are supposed to provide that on a portal. And the principle behind Inspire is that data should be collected only once and used many times. The metadata structure is standardized across Europe. Unfortunately, not all countries have been meeting those requirements. I just see quickly that Romania is probably about average. It's not as good as Austria or Germany or Italy, but it's better than France, for example. This is quite an important data set for making the Copernicus data useful with other data sets, for example, biodiversity data sets. Okay, just moving on quickly for that because it's a bit technical. One of the campaigns that we have at the moment is to try to remind the Commission that they've promised to launch this Green Data for All initiative linked to the Inspire directive, and the Commission is not doing it. I think probably because the member states don't like the Inspire, they don't like having to make more of their data public. Okay, but those two slides are a bit technical. I'll move quickly on to reasons for planting agroforestry. And I'm structuring this around things called result indicators, which the European Union uses to measure the efficiency of the CAP. So we've got the first one, which is a result indicator adaptation to climate change. And I just showed two pictures as an example of what happens when a big storm goes through an area of conifers. So this was the storm Klaus in 2006. So these two forests are about 15 kilometers apart. You see total destruction there. You see the agroforestry system of in this case, walnut with a very much deeper root system. The trees are widely spaced, they're more wind stable, and they're not touched at all by that storm. The next indicator is reducing emissions from livestock sector, and there's quite a lot of evidence coming now that feeding leaves to livestock, particularly leaves that have a high protein content and also high tannin content, will reduce the methane emission of ruminants. So we could think about restoring the coppicing system or the pollarding system, which was typical of much of Europe a long time ago. Next one, the next priority for these indicators is carbon storage of soils and biomass. And I think, as we all know, with an agroforestry system, the tree is much bigger, its roots spread underneath the crop. And in the case of grassland, you can add the sequestration from the grassland to the sequestration from the trees. So it's better than, well, it's not better than forest, but the total sequestration of a silvopastoral system will actually be quite similar to a forest, despite the fact there are many fewer individual trees. What else? Green energy is one of the other targets for the EU. So agriculture and forestry should produce a lot of green energy. I just put this slide in to remind everybody. So if we look at the red one, this is Europe, the whole of Europe 2018. So despite everything we hear about solar panels and wind and everything else, wood energy, fuel wood, is still producing more than half of Europe's renewable energy. And when you add the agricultural product, which is the green, and even when you add the black liquor from making paper, industrial processes, then biomass is still contributing a huge proportion of energy. So forestry and agroforestry are very important for this target. For the next target, which is energy savings in agriculture, I don't know what's happening in Romania, but everywhere in Spain, everyone is planting solar panels, and there's a lot of mixtures of crops with animals and solar panels. But you can think about the same type of system with trees. So this is from Northern Ireland, and because the sheep, so Northern Ireland is cold. There's a lot of wind. There's a lot of rain. So the farmer is able to put the sheep outside of the animal houses earlier in spring, and he keeps them outside later in autumn. So he gets a total of 17 weeks more with the animals on the field rather than having to be protected inside. So that's a saving in energy in agriculture. The other thing is the improvement of soils. Huge amount of evidence about agroforestry reducing soil carbon loss through its reduction in wind and water erosion. Another EU target is the share of agricultural land under commitments to reduce ammonia emission. And we would very much say that trees are fantastic at absorbing on their foliage at absorbing ammonia, in addition to taking up the nitrate that gets into the soil. And a lot of the ammonia that gets into the atmosphere, well, a lot in terms of the greenhouse gas efficiency or the greenhouse gas importance, a lot of that ammonia will change to nitrous oxide in the atmosphere, which is a greenhouse gas. So that's another advantage of agroforestry. The next one that the EU has as a target is protecting water quality. This is just an example from Wales in the UK, where this group of farmers got together and decided to plant trees at the boundaries of fields, or they took a soil map and looked at where trees would be better used, you know, the worst land, the land they were not using for intensive agriculture. They planted with trees, and there's huge benefits there in terms of the way that the trees have held the water and reduced the flood flow into the rivers, and downstream in the rivers the floods are being significantly reduced because of this use of an agroforestry system. So the other big advantage for trees would be sustainable nutrient management, and here you have a slide suggesting all the potential benefits of mixing trees, generally associated with the fact that the roots are permeating the soil and improving the structure of the soil, but also absorbing nitrate. We're almost finished, but water is an interesting one too. I guess in Romania you must be suffering increasing flooding instances. So this is looking at designs where you can plant rows of trees in order to direct floodwater away from the river into floodplains. So instead of planting expensive concrete barriers, you can use rows of trees to do this. And this is one example from France where the floodwater has gone down and it's just left all the branches trapped between the trees. So it's a very cheap way of making flood control barriers. This is another example from Belgium, an area which is prone to flooding, but you can plant the trees on the swales, the ridges, and then these flooded areas you could use for other purposes. So engineering works is very possible. And I think the last one is just looking at the environmental climate performance through investment. This is looking at some research where you are using integrated pest management. So you're using the natural controls of pests of cereals, and those control insects live within your rows of trees. And the last slide in this section is talking about environmental performance through knowledge. And there's a lot of good tools potentially being developed by the European Union to provide a farmer, basing on the LPIS system that you showed before, basing on those very detailed photographs, that a farmer can input his data, get satellite imagery, including relating to trees, and optimize the use of his land. Okay, not too much detail on that. So I've got 4 slides of conclusions. The first one is that we need to plant more trees. So we need targets for tree planting, but those targets should not be planting conventional forestry in the normal way. So these targets that we have in the EU of 3 billion trees by 2030, which you can get a figure, and incidentally, it's not moving very fast in the UK, in the European Union. So the target was for 3 billion additional trees to be planted by 2030. This started in 2021. And we should have been planting 300 million trees a year. We've actually planted 10 million trees in 3 years. So it's very difficult. As you guys will know, you have a target for planting trees, but it's very hard to actually achieve it. But what I'm saying with this slide is that target should look at trees on forest land, but also trees in agricultural land. So that's the first option. The second priority is the slide that I showed before, that you need to quantify trees outside the forest and use maps like this to focus the trees where they're needed. The next slide is showing that you need to understand the failures for the previous programs. So if we're looking at the program, the Common Agricultural Policy program that you just finished, it had a target to plant 600 100,000 hectares of afforestation by the end of the program, so by 2024 probably. But so far they've only managed to plant 40,000 hectares. Yeah, so 40,000 hectares from 600,000 hectares. For the agroforestry section, the target was planting 74,000 hectares and they had only achieved 4,000 hectares. So for some reason, these member states, the ones in green who were the ones that had agroforestry programs, the member states and regions were not very effective in implementing those programs and those targets. For a variety of reasons which we can discuss, but often the deal wasn't good enough, or the farmers were worried about losing their entitlement to basic payments. Okay, that's number three. Number three is using all this new technology that I've talked about before to quantify the benefit that a farmer is making to the environment by planting trees, and then come up with a scheme to measure that benefit and pay the farmer according to the degree of benefit. So payment by results schemes in agro-environment schemes are becoming very popular. And the last slide is this one, that we really need to be aiming for a diverse landscape with areas of woodland which are joined by green veins, joined by agroforestry systems, by riparian planting, by planting along the edges of streams and roads. So agroforestry is very diverse. It can take a lot of forms. And in the Romanian context, maybe it's a way of refreshing the type of landscape with the very old oaks in Transylvania that we know of from Romania, maybe planting more of that and restoring it. I'm sure you guys are probably engaged in programs to improve these types of old landscapes, but clearly we need more of it, and not just in Romania, we need it throughout Europe. So I hope that was useful. That's 40 minutes or so. I'll stop my sharing now.
Thank you very much, Gerry, for this wonderful presentation. I want to start by saying that, as far as I know, actually, according to a recently published study, across worldwide, there are more than 800 definitions of forests. So you show us a chart with the situation in Romania, according to which there are more than 6.9 million, almost 7 million hectares of forest land in Romania. But it's good to know that in our country, according to our forestry code, there is a specific term called forest fund. For example, in Romania, out of approximately 7 million hectares, 6.6 is so-called forest fund, and the rest 0.4 million, so 400,000 hectares, are the so-called vegetation outside the forest fund. So still forest, but not managed under forestry law, let's say, or all the forestry law, let's say. So we should be very careful, because as far as I know, there are many differences also at European level regarding these definitions. So it would be best in the following years to have, let's say, European definitions in all the member states. Why not?
Yes, but the definition should be made by the member state. You will not have one single definition that covers everybody, which is why the 3 thresholds for the height of the tree, the minimum height of the tree, because in some countries that's 2 meters, in some it's 3 meters, in some it's 5 meters. For the minimum block size, which can go from 0.05, Czechoslovakia, for example, it's tiny, to what you've got in Romania, so 0.25, to what they use in Portugal and Spain, which is 1 hectare. And then the percentage crown cover is, and now these have been formalized, because these definitions are given to the UN Framework Committee for Climate Change, UNFCCC. So they're written in law, and when a country changes its law, it has to tell the UNFCCC that it's done that, and tell Brussels as well. So there was and is a lot of variation, but because of climate monitoring, particularly, it's become much stricter, I think, and therefore I hope it will improve the monitoring also of trees outside the official forest.
Hopefully. I want
Oh,
to
sorry.
continue.
Sorry. One thing I should have mentioned. Sorry.
Yes,
There is going to be in Q3 of this year. So after the holidays, there will be published a draft European regulation, which is called Forest Monitoring and Strategic Planning. It is the responsibility, the co-responsibility of the Director General for Environment, but also the Director General for Climate. And that agriculture has nothing to do with it now, which is quite interesting. So that shows, because climate are involved, it shows the climate department is getting very interested in ensuring that we have standardized monitoring systems for forest used throughout Europe. Well, not standardized definitions, but we have clarity of the monitoring methods which are used.
good to know. I want to continue with a question from our Facebook page, coming from Mihai from Tomorrow's Forest Foundation from Romania, asking that can agroforestry project work together with carbon sequestration project, carbon credits? Can such projects be developed?
Yes. What EURAF would like to see is that the Common Agricultural Policy, the eco schemes, the Pillar 2 payments for agri-environmental climate measures, which can be used to support tree planting, those projects can also feed into carbon credit systems for carbon farming. At the moment, there is still a little bit of doubt about the requirement for additionality for carbon farming. So therefore, if you get money from the CAP, there is a worry that you will not be eligible to get money for the carbon farming scheme because it's not additional. You've already planted the trees, so why should they give you more money? So these are the issues of detail that we need to resolve, but hopefully, I think that should not be a problem, but it still needs to be resolved. So the carbon farming, as you know, there is a union, there's a framework regulation for the certification of carbon removals, which is being considered by the Environment Committee at the moment. And many other committees are submitting changes. In fact, if any of your members want to comment on the text of that regulation, please send them to myself and Constantine, and we can try to include those as amendments. The thinking is that this regulation will be passed before Parliament ends for the next elections, but that's quite a tight time scale, so it might not happen.
Okay, thank you. I want to introduce also Costin in our discussions, and I want to ask him, based on Mara's question, perhaps Costin, you can write it, please, read it, please. And
yeah,
let's
thanks,
follow
Mihai.
the discussion based on Mara's questions, please.
Thanks for that, Mihai. Yeah, Gerry. So we have quite some viewers on the Facebook page of our colleagues from Planting Goodies in Romania. They also asked some questions, which reminded me of the discussions we had back in Montpellier in 2019 with some other people who were there right behind the establishment of EURAF, like Christian Dupraz and other colleagues from Montpellier. And this is about these different views, right, around trees that are situated on agricultural land. So that's my interpretation. And Ms. Mara Minculescu indicated that typically the strategic plan from Romania, so the strategic plan of the CAP, would not allow more than 100 square meter of woody vegetation per hectare. I tried to check the exact definition, the strategic plan, but I guess my internet connection doesn't help me at this stage. Maybe we can look at that later. And she was saying that there's a paradox typically because of this rule. So on the one hand, people would chop off trees, right, to make sure that comply with the rule, and on the other hand, they would plant trees because they would like to benefit from the subsidies. And I think the question here for you, having followed right the CAP discussions for a couple of decades already, yeah, what's your impression about the situation, and have you looked typically at you've showed right this different this table with the various eco schemes, right, in European member states. How has this evolved, right? Typically, I think that's the question in time. And you've obviously done some lobby towards the European Commission in the coming years. And the fact that we have many ones, right, next to agroforestry practices is also thanks to the work you've done in EURAF. Yeah, so coming back again to the question, right? Why do you think there's this maybe confusion or contradiction, right? Typically, on the one hand, typically farmers willing to comply with these requirements for eco schemes, but doing something that contradicts maybe good farming practices.
Okay, good. Thanks, Constantine. While you were asking that, I just opened the Romanian plan and my translation of the definition of agroforestry. So I don't know if I can share my screen again. Maybe I can try to do that. Share screen. Window. Yeah. Share. Okay, so I should be sharing that now. I need to make it bigger. Oops. I need to make it bigger. This will be in English, of course. It would be so much better if I was sharing the Romanian, but because you would understand what these trees are. Okay, so it seems to be saying that agroforestry is recognized on arable land, on permanent cropland. So that would be vines or olives or fruit trees, and grassland. So it's tree strips not more than 30 meters wide for the protection of agricultural production. But it says that detailed rules for the tree and shrub species will be laid down in the regulatory framework. So there's no detail given by Romania. It does talk about the tree species that are foreseen, pedunculate oak, downy oak, and so on. So the detail given by Romania is much less than many of the other countries. So I don't know about the 100. A lot of countries still use the threshold of 100 trees per hectare. I've not seen any country using a threshold of 100 meters of crown cover per hectare, which would be very low. So that would be what, 1%? Which seems extremely low. And given that your hedges can be 30 meters wide, then I would think that you can have several strips, you know, not just one, because you would only be able to have two strips, 30 meters wide, or 3 strips within a hectare. That would be the maximum according to, if that was the rule. So yes, but any information on that will be very welcome. I can't read Romanian, and we've not had time to look at the Romanian plan in detail.
Yeah, thanks for that, Gerry. Maybe an exercise we can continue right after the event to look in more detail the strategic plan. And good to mention, right, Gerry, that this analysis you have conducted with colleagues from other associations and project partners was conducted in the context of the Digitaf project, right? A Horizon Europe project in which EURAF is involved. So we have quite some interesting deliverables that are coming up, and we'll gladly share those with the audience if they're interested.
Yep.
Gerry, I want to ask you, because you mentioned European Forest Strategy, and one of its targets is saying that by 2040 we should plant 3 billion additional trees. So planting trees outside forest on agricultural lands. I don't know what is the current situation, but I don't think it's a good one. I don't know the concrete figures. I know for sure that some member states and many organizations did not report the additional planted trees in this platform. But as I said, these trees should be planted on agricultural land. From your point of view and according to your experience, what shall the owners of the agricultural lands receive in order to plant the trees? Because from years, 10 of years, they are used to plant several crop species, and now someone is telling them to plant trees.
Mm. Well, okay. First of all, on the target. So the target was established by DG Environment. DG Environment has a portal. You can find that if you type 3 billion trees, and it has a count up procedure. So from my slide, when I did my slide last week, there were 10.6 million additional trees planted, and that was over a period of 2.5 years. When you remember that the 3 billion additional trees by 2030, not 40, it converts to 300 million trees a year. So already we should have almost 900 million trees, and we have a little bit over 10 million trees planted. So there's a long way to go. On the other hand, clearly it will speed up, but it appears only to have 30 active organizations. Only 30 organizations in the whole of Europe have reported the additional tree planting, and that's what's disappointing, because you represent an organization that is responsible for tree planting. So why are the organizations not recording their planting? Maybe that's a question to you. Why did your organization decide not to go to the portal and record what you had done?
I may say that from my point of view, the procedure is time consuming, for example.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Very time consuming.
Really?
And it's very bureaucratic, even if we
Wow.
are talking about Brussels procedures, let's say. But from my experience, very, very bureaucratic and time consuming. We need to, let's say, hire a person to do it every year.
Wow.
So this is perhaps one of the issues that could be discussed at the European level, at Brussels, for example. I have also another curiosity, actually, it's another question for Gerry regarding tree species, because I suppose you know that there is a great debate at European level regarding black locust, for example, Robinia pseudacacia, which was brought from North America 4 centuries ago. For example, our neighbors, Hungary, has 20% of forest land covered by black locust. In Romania, we have 5%. In Europe, more than 40 countries planted black locust, but some, let's say, stakeholders are saying that it is an invasive species, which is not included, for example, at European Commission in the annex of the regulations, specific regulations. And I am very curious to know what is your opinion about planting black locust in Europe.
Mihai, I'm a forester as well. My background is of a forester. I'm a UK chartered forester, so I'm not a member of a green movement when it comes to these issues. And for me, to be honest, the problems and the pressures that forestry is facing at the moment, commercial forestry is facing at the moment, with the spread of every sort of disease on every sort of native species you can find, and with the changes that we're facing because of climate change, we cannot afford to be purist. And we should, if we need to plant a tree from abroad that is better suited to climate change, then that should be allowed. Not in all areas. There should be some areas which are protected, but that should be allowed. For example, grey alder in Estonia or Latvia, one of the two, I think, it's got very large plantations, and it succeeded very on the Sincana. But it's other people are saying that it's an alien tree and should not be allowed. Where I come from in Scotland, almost every species of tree is imported because we're an island. So where a lot of people has the same argument for sycamore, for example. Yeah. So Almus platanoides, where not a lot of green movements say that we shouldn't be planting that because it's not native. So yes, There is the argument has some merits, but forestry is under so much pressure that we shouldn't be too pure about these things, I would say. And probably the same comes a little bit to genetic manipulation. If I could find an ash which someone had manipulated genetically so that that ash was resistant to cholera disease, I would plant it. I really would plant it because we miss having ash trees, chestnut trees, elm trees. There's so many species now you cannot plant because they're wiped out by disease. I just made myself very unpopular with some green movements. You better not show this too widely.
Welcome to my team, Gerry. So no worry. I want to ask you something, of course, again, about your personal opinion regarding these 3 billion additional trees. You showed us that map where we can plant at European level, but in your opinion, which should be let's say, the main countries that should take the lead? Because, for example, in Romania, we are mainly an agricultural country. Most of our lands are in agricultural use. Like, okay, Ukraine, not yet in European Union. Like Poland, for example, our forest land is about 20 up to 27 or to 29 percentages, exactly this slide.
Yeah.
So where the European Union should plant more?
So if I showed you a map of erosion in Romania, it would be more or less the red marks, wouldn't it? It would be those areas which are most under threat. So my argument is that you plant trees where they can have biggest environmental impact, and that is the areas where there are fewest trees. So I would say all the countries which have red areas here should be planting trees outside the forest to try to turn the red green. And there's, from this map, there's a huge amount of red in Romania, as you can see. So I think all countries have priorities. You know, in France, for example, the bocage in Brittany is not a serious problem. The areas down in Portugal and Spain, the areas of Dehesa are still very green. That's not a planting area, but these areas here in Spain are cereal growing areas. So there's an emphasis on growing trees there. But so I can't say which countries should lead. I can say that all countries, from the statistics I showed before, all countries have been very poor in meeting their planting targets in the last CAP.
Thank you for your answer. I want to give the floor to Costin because he wants to provide some clarification about some definitions. Costin.
Yeah, well, Gerry, right, asked me to put that on our to-do list, right, to continue the work on the terminology typically. So you've already, right, shared some insights, right, about the eco schemes typically used by put into place by the Romanian authorities. And if colleagues have questions about those, they can see the equivalent, right, in Romanian, typically for buffer strips, for mounds, right, for corpses, etc. For any other technical terms in English, they can see that in the strategic plan. And then another exercise, right, Gerry, you suggested we conduct. It's about the equivalent translation of agroforestry practices in Romanian as well. Something I think, due to the fact that we didn't have a Romanian association active within EURAF, something would like to change in the future. We didn't manage to do, I'm afraid. So that could possibly, you're asking, right, Mihai, who could take the lead? I think it's about working together also at micro level, right, at community level, at regional level, with both farmers and foresters. Before that, we might need a bit of clarification also from possibly experts like you, right, to see how can those different terminologies, right, provide clarity to authorities among others, and also to other stakeholders involved. In Romania, right, I think we have different interpretations of what agroforestry could be. We have, I think, traditional silvopastoral landscapes and Transylvania, as it was mentioned earlier. Then again, I think in the southeast we have the windbreaks, which you're also right, subject you're working on. I think in planting good deeds. So I think those are interesting elements. We can work jointly to support also the expansion of those agroforestry systems in the country. So Gerry, you share that in the chat box, right? I think we can also link it in the Facebook, on the Facebook page of the event. Thanks for that.
So you see, it's not finished. There are other countries as well that have not contributed to it, but maybe half of the European languages are there already, and we would very much love to have Romanian versions of those. It was interesting. The Swedes, for example, took it quite seriously. They made a version of it and then sent it to the agriculture department, and got approval from the agriculture department for these terms. So it may be something you could think about doing in Romania as well. It might be a way of making a linkage with the agriculture department to ensure that what you use by a term for forest grazing, for example, which is different from wood pasture, maybe you could check with them what they understand too.
I'm quite sure that we'll have several debates and let's say several discussions regarding these topics. I'm very happy that we, let's say, have a first presentation in English regarding this topic, regarding these agroforestry systems, which in my opinion should be more developed also in Romania, because there's plenty of space. Trust me, I think I know very well my country because I'm traveling a lot every year, more than 50,000 kilometers every year. So some countries, some districts are very well known for me. We have some, let's say, national targets. We have several, let's say, disputes, but we have also solutions for everything. So we are very happy to be in contact with you and other colleagues. So let's make good things together. Why not? So Gerry, in the end, I want to take the thanks from our Facebook page and bring it to you. We want also to thank you for your wonderful presentation. It will be available on our Facebook account. It will be also published on our YouTube channel. So everyone who has a question, we will take it and we'll redirection it to you. So thank you very much for your time and for your presentation.
I've been delighted to meet you all and to give the presentation, and look forward to further cooperation, and also to Romania being formally a member of EURAF soon.
The president of our association is here, so he took some notes, I'm quite sure.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, tremendous. So thank you very much. Bye-bye, everyone.
All the best. Thanks all of you. Bye-bye.
Yep.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.